Most players think the things that decide the success of a Mythic Plus run are pretty obvious. Your damage is too low, your route is bad, the tank's pulling too slow, the healer isn't pressing buttons, the usual culprits. And while those things obviously matter, I think there is a lot more to it than that. The most annoying part though, is that a lot of the things that ruin keys are not immediately obvious while you're actually playing the game. How many times have you gotten to the end of a run, whether it was bricked or just barely timed, and wondered how the timer was even that close in the first place? In this video, I want to go through the 7 mistakes that are likely costing you keys without you even realizing it. Not the typical do more damage or use your kicks advice, but the less obvious mistakes that quietly bleed time throughout a dungeon until the timer suddenly looks way tighter than it actually should. The first of these mistakes is one that I'm actually pretty guilty of personally, and that's not keeping up with trends and new tech in the Mythic Plus space. Because there are thousands of Mythic Plus runs being done every single day, the game evolves constantly and very quickly. This doesn't just mean like weird cheese strats. It includes everything from routes, different skips, ways to handle certain mechanics, even tiny bits of class-specific tech that can make certain parts of a dungeon way easier. Sometimes these just give a minor advantage, and then sometimes they're genuinely key defining. Knowing that Blessing of Freedom can immune the slow on the first boss of Pit might save you a death. Knowing that there's a damage crystal in the Magister's Terrace hallway that gives you a damage amp might make this really difficult pack a lot safer. Knowing that a route with 3 subjugators in the first pull of Seat is very fast and actually not a whole lot harder than just doing 2 might save you 30 seconds just for free. And there are hundreds of these little things every single season. You're never going to know them all, but the more of them you pick up, the more useful you become to every group that you join. The easiest way to know about these things is to just stay connected with the Mythic Plus push space as much as you can. You don't need to live and breathe it, just pick a few places that you already use and start following the people who are actively talking about keys in those places. You can follow the competitive WoW subreddit. You can follow Mythic Plus pushers on X. You can subscribe to a few Mythic Plus focused YouTubers. You can join some Discord communities. You can watch top players on Twitch, especially people who play your spec. If you're already doom scrolling on X, you might as well pick up a few pieces of dungeon tech while you're there, even if it briefly interrupts your gooning. Because Mythic Plus is more of a knowledge game than people like to admit. The more you absorb, the less often you'll find yourself losing time to things that players have already solved weeks ago. Moving back to the topic of routing, another mistake that I see often is not efficiently chaining packs. The impact of this on the timer can be extremely dungeon specific, but the basic rule is pretty simple. If the only mobs left alive do mostly tank damage, or any group-wide mechanics are avoidable or manageable, you should probably pull it onto the next pack instead of standing still to finish it off. Pit of Sauron this season is probably the cleanest example. These Graveblades have a huge health pool, but most of what they do is aimed at the tank. So if one is left alive with 30% health, standing there and killing it by itself is pretty much just dead time. Instead, you should be looking to drag it to the next pack to keep the dungeon moving. In Pit, there are 3 or 4 pulls where this happens pretty constantly. Each of those chains individually can save you 20 to 30 seconds. In a dungeon with a 30-minute timer, that adds up pretty quickly. The same thing applies to the defenders in the later half of Mysara Caverns. If every pull ends with one defender slowly dying from 30 or 40% health while the group just stands around waiting, you're bleeding an insane amount of time. But if you keep them moving forward, it will become a lot faster, and it really isn't dangerous at all. Obviously, you shouldn't just mindlessly chain everything. Some mobs absolutely need to die before you move on. But if a mob isn't doing any meaningful damage to the party and isn't posing a meaningful threat to anyone, the only reason you're standing there killing it is because it's got health left, and that's just wasting time. The next mistake is arguably the most important one on the entire list, and it has nothing to do with actually pressing your buttons in the game. I have lost count of the number of times I've been asked, do you pug or do you play on a team? The answer is usually not one or the other. I do play as a team, but also the higher that you climb in Mythic Plus, the more your social network impacts who you play with even outside of a regular team. The player pool gets smaller and you start seeing a lot more familiar faces. As a result, your reputation starts to have much more of an impact. The truth is, I'm very rarely pugging in the purest sense. Even when I'm not playing with my team, the group that I play with will usually contain at least 1 or 2 people that I know or that I'm like loosely connected to or aware of in one way or another. That doesn't happen by accident either. That comes from spending multiple seasons trying to be the type of player that I would actually want to play with myself. Someone who is kind, someone who is willing to learn, someone who doesn't crash out the second a mistake happens, someone who's happy to help other people, and someone who's still trying to improve and push higher as well. You can build this yourself as well. It does take time, but it is very worth it at the end of the day. I think the pug system has taught a lot of players to approach Mythic Plus in the most opportunistic way possible, only applying to keys that give you score, only adding players who are above you on the ladder of M+, only treating other people as a way to get into better groups. That is a massive mistake. Your social network in-game can genuinely make or break a season. Be nice to people. Add players who you actually vibe with, not just ones that might be able to give you a free key here and there. And be willing to run other people's keys, even if there's nothing directly in it for you. An autistic guy telling you how to make friends does feel a little bit rich, but this is honestly one of the biggest things that I see people drop the ball with all the time, especially once they start pushing into higher end keys for the first time. Beyond just the score side of things too, building that network just makes the game infinitely more enjoyable. There is no point climbing the mountain if you don't have anyone with you to enjoy the view once you get there. Coming back to actual gameplay now, the next mistake is a little bit of a weird one. How many times have you had a wipe where someone has immediately typed "no defensive?" It happens all the time. What if I told you though that some of those wipes happen because people pressed their defensives too often? What often happens when a big AoE goes out is that the entire group will panic. Everyone presses their personals, the group rips all of their raid cooldowns, and the healer will send a major cooldown on top of that. In that exact moment, everybody is extremely safe. The problem comes with the next AoE damage. Because now everyone is dry, the healer's already committed their cooldowns, the group's defensives are gone, and all of a sudden people are scrambling to live through things that should have been pretty manageable. The mistake here is overlapping your defensives with healer cooldowns, or the healer overlapping their cooldowns with your defensives. With Omni CD being removed, this is obviously a bit harder to track than it used to be. Some add-ons can still help with tracking defensives and healer cooldowns. Mini CC is what I use, although it's a little inaccurate. I believe Elismere UI has a similar function, and some healer cooldowns are obviously fairly visually apparent when they actually use them. But the best solution to this is usually just communication. Comms is ideal, but this is also one of the main reasons that I made my callouts add-on. You can call out when you're using something or when you need someone else to use something. I've also now added a custom input option so you can make something specific to your class, like I am using Conduit now. The mistake to avoid here is pretty simple. Don't have all 5 people in the party solve the same damage event all at once and leave nothing in the tank for the next one. On a very similar note, poor coordination of DPS cooldowns can also have a similar kind of effect, except this time it normally directly impacts the timer. Even at a title level, it's very rare that a pack will actually need every single DPS in the party to rip their cooldowns at the same time. What will often happen is that you will have a pack that gets completely murdered. But because of this, everyone's cooldowns are half wasted because the mobs died before the cooldowns even finished. And then the pack after it is going to take forever. This pull just before the third boss of Skyreach, I think, is like the best example here. It is extremely fun to come into this pack and just explode the little mobs. But if every DPS sends everything here, you often only end up getting half value out of your cooldowns, and then the whole group walks into the boss with nothing in the tank. In a lot of situations like this, it is better for one person to send on the pack and then the other person to hold off and send on the boss or the next pull coming up. The pack might take a smidgen longer, but you will usually make that time back immediately because the next pull has much more damage in it. You don't need to desync your cooldowns on every pack. There are absolutely plenty of pulls where having all DPS send on it is actually perfectly fine and probably what you would want. But there are also a lot of these pulls where oversending just makes the current pack die slightly faster, while the next pack or the boss takes way, way longer. This is probably the main personal use of my callouts add-on that I personally use in keys. I will often use the button that says, I have damaged cooldowns. This will help alert the other DPS that they may not need to send on this next pack. Or on top of that, it can also prompt the tank to get a wriggle on if I'm sitting on damaged cooldowns while they're like going a little bit too slow grouping a pack or something like that. Now, I know that I promised that I'd avoid generic advice like press defensives, and this next point is like kind of close to that, but I think it's a little bit different. The next mistake is not using your class utility anywhere near to its full potential. Unholy Death Knight, I think, is the best example of this by far, because the spec is not just strong because it has good damage or good passive defensiveness. It is strong because it can completely ignore or solve a ridiculous number of mechanics. Anti-Magic Shell alone can immune so much if you use it before something comes out. In Seep, you can immune the debuff from the boss stomp. You can immune the debuff from the Rift Wardens. The Subjugator Heal Absorb can be immuned. The Stomp from the final mobs can be immuned. The beams at the end of the dungeon from the mobs and the boss can be immuned. That is just a single ability in one of the dungeons, and it doesn't even cover everything in there. If you then add on top of that grips, you can group the slimes together. You can grab casters onto pulls. You can interrupt the heal channels. Suddenly it becomes pretty obvious why Death Knight is so damn good. But the important part here is that you actually have to know about these things and do these things. Your class can have all the utility in the world, but if you're not using it to actually solve the problems it can solve, then you're just leaving most of the class's value on the table. And while DK is an extreme example, every class will have its own versions of this, its own versions of unique pieces of tech that can solve certain things in certain dungeons. This also ties nicely back to my first point. Find a streamer or a creator who mains your spec and just watch what they're doing. Not just their damage or their rotation, just watch what they're doing throughout a key. What are they immuning? What are they using to stop things? Where are they sending their grips? When are they using freedom or dispel or baiting or any of the sort of stuff that ties into your class? Because a lot of it will never show up in logs and you will only learn it by just specifically watching people who are already doing it. The final mistake is so simple that it almost feels silly, and yet it is probably the one that people miss the most often. Not playing the game enough. I don't just mean that you should quit your job and start running keys all day. What I mean is that many players will just sit in LFG, constantly refreshing, waiting for some IO keys to appear. Before they know it, they will have spent literal hours not even playing the game. I do understand an element of FOMO here. You do feel like if you stop watching LFG, then that perfect key is actually going to pop up and you'll miss it. But for your own improvement, I think the best thing you can do is actually just play keys, even if they're a few levels below the one that you technically need. I used to do this a lot, and then I sort of slipped a little bit, and I've been trying to do this a lot more lately. Right now on my DK, I am working on the last couple of 22s and starting to look towards 23s. But instead of just sitting in Silvermoon for hours waiting for the exact key that I need, I'll search for anything between 20 and 23 and then queue for lower ones even if they don't give me score. This helps with practicing the spec. It helps like learning dungeons. It gives me chances to actually just like press buttons as well. But it also ties nicely back to the networking point. You never know when the person running a 20 today is going to have a 22 for you in a couple of days. And you better believe that the person who helped them with their 20, even when it didn't give them score, is much, much more likely to get a look in for that next key. So yes, pushing a score does matter, but getting better doesn't come from just sitting in Silvermoon all day. You improve by actually playing. If you address all of these mistakes that I've talked about, I promise you that you'll be timing keys much more frequently and at a higher level than you ever have done before. A huge thanks to my YouTube members, The Joy of Checks, Tobias, Yulem, Is This Real, and Obold at the Keystone Legend tier, as well as everyone else who will appear on the end screen. If you'd like to support my adventures here on YouTube, you can click the join button below the video or the buy me a coffee link at the top of the description. Lastly, thank you to you, the viewer, for hanging out all the way until the end. If you want to see some specific dungeon tech to help save you time in the current season's keys, check out the suggested video on screen. Otherwise, see you all in Azeroth, gamers. Until next time, take care.